Hi there, and a very warm welcome to Season 6, Episode 40 of People Soup. It's Ross McIntosh here.
You know, the kindness and love I've received from so many people in my life and how special that is. I don't take it for granted, and I do my best to give it back to everyone as much as I can as well. And that drives my life, and it drives my clinical work, and sometimes I'm not the best technical clinician. I'm not the best person at saying, right, we've got these 6 sessions, come back, focus on this topic, because my value is being present and being kind. I do the technical stuff, I hope. I know what I'm doing, but that's never the foremost of the work I'm doing.
In this episode, you'll meet Dr. Ben Sedley, a clinical psychologist, author, and speaker, and he shares insights from his extensive career in mental health. He discusses his journey from studying psychology to helping people of all ages cope with life's challenges through self-compassion and ACT. He talks a bit about his books, including Stuff That Sucks for Teenagers, Stuff That's Loud, A Teen's Guide to Unspiralling When OCD Gets Noisy, and Holding the Heavy Stuff for Adults, offering practical advice for mental health. Additionally, he recounts his days in a band he formed with fellow psychologist and friend of the show, Dr. Joe Oliver. The episode also delves into the importance of treating OCD seriously, the power of ACT, acceptance and commitment therapy, and Ben's personal values and experiences. Thanks for tuning in, folks. People Soup is a podcast that mixes stories, science, and a sprinkle of daftness to explore what helps people thrive at work and beyond. Our mission is to give you the ingredients for a better work life through insights and stories grounded in behavioral science, especially acceptance and commitment therapy and other evidence-based approaches. Before we go on, let's take a quick scoot over to the news desk. I am presenting 2 courses this year in collaboration with Joe Oliver and the team at Contextual Consulting. The first is called Building Better Teams. In this one, I'll present a practitioner approach to pro-social and ACT-based collaboration in a 3-hour workshop on the 11th of February. Collaboration and cooperation are the foundation of successful teams, but achieving them can often feel elusive. The pro-social approach offers a cutting-edge, evidence-based framework that integrates the principles of ACT, evolutionary science, and Elinor Ostrom's Nobel Prize-winning core design principles. I'll introduce you to the approach, my experience of using the approach, and the core tools. The second is called Leading with Purpose, ACT Strategies for Resilient and Authentic Leadership. This one is over 3 sessions, and I'll introduce you to fresh and practical approaches to support leaders, showing how key skills rooted in behavioral science can help them develop and sustain their authentic leadership style. These skills are designed to enhance resilience, focus, and effectiveness while supporting leaders to navigate the pressures and complexities of modern workplaces with clarity and purpose. You'll find the details of both of these courses in the show notes or over on contextualconsulting.co.uk. So, it's time to get a brew on and have a listen to part 1 of my chat with Dr. Ben Sedley. Dr. Ben Sedley, a very warm welcome to People Soup.
Hello, good evening from New Zealand. Good morning, wherever you are.
Yes, indeed. Now, Ben, you'll be used to my research department, and they've been doing a bit of digging about you, and they've found some details which I'm going to share with you. But keep a good ear out, because they're not always known for their 100% accuracy. So it says here, Ben, Dr. Ben Sedley is a clinical psychologist, author, and speaker. After his initial psychology studies, he went on to earn a PhD exploring how young people understand mental health. Since then, he spent over 20 years working with children, teenagers, and adults, helping them navigate the complexities of life with greater self-compassion and clarity. His books have resonated across cultures and have found their way into homes, schools, and even shelters around the world, providing support in places where it's needed most. Those areas you mentioned where your book has found its way into, I'd like to add the workplace, because after reading your latest book, I think it will be really valuable for people in the workplace. And it's the place where a lot of adults spend most of their time. So that's my ambition for this book. I want more people in the workplace to have access to it and to read it, because I think it would be super useful.
I would love that. It's not written for people with mental illness. The book is written for human beings. And as you said, a lot of human beings spend way too much time in the workplace.
Yeah. And Ben's latest book, which we'll be discussing in part 2, is called Holding the Heavy Stuff, Making Space for Critical Thoughts and Painful Emotions. Now, Ben, there's one other thing the research department came up with, which I'm gonna share with you. Now, it says here that you, when you were studying psychology, you were studying alongside one Dr. Joe Oliver, friend of the show, and whilst you were studying during the day, in the evenings you packed away the psychology books and you got out the guitars, amps and drums because you had a band. And apparently the band was formed of 3 psychologists and an architect. Very well qualified band, and it was called Road Fisher. Now, forgive me, I've never heard of Road Fisher, and I have checked, I've looked on Spotify, I can't find any tracks. But tell me, is there any truth in this revelation that you and Joe were part of a band?
That your research department is amazing, because the band existed long before social media and Spotify and photos, and there may be an oil painting of us somewhere. It's Road Fisher was the name of one of the songs that Joe wrote about a serial killer, I believe, and that became the name of the band as well. And you've never heard of us before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, because although we were one of the most overly qualified bands in the world, musically, not so much. But it was a lot of fun, and especially when we were studying clinical psychology, which is an incredibly stressful process, having one, an outlet to have fun, and 2, an association with our clinical rooms that wasn't stressful, it was fun. That was really nice. Years later, when I went back as a supervisor supporting my students who were having the exam, I hear lots of stories of other supervisors going in there and having a trauma reaction when they see the clinical room again, whereas I went in and remembered the band. So that was a nice way of connecting to that space. And thankfully the songs aren't available.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And I might start to mount a campaign to reform the band. I don't think I'd get very far looking at your reaction.
Tell you what, 100,000 hits and we'll be there.
Excellent. Excellent. Now, Ben, I've shared a little bit about you and your background and your career, but I wonder if you could tell us a bit more. Thinking about any pivotal moments in your career, perhaps when you started to study or how you found your way into psychology, and just to ease us into getting to know you a bit more.
Sure. That's a great opening start, broad question. It's the kind of question I ask to the clients I'm working with. Tell me a bit about yourself. And they always freak out and freeze and have no idea what they're supposed to start with. You asked for the psychology story. I finished high school, did a gap year. I came back to university thinking I would do a degree in English or theatre and film. And I took a first-year psychology paper because I needed some papers because my sister really enjoyed her first-year psychology paper. And also I thought it helped me write interesting stories and songs about different people. And I found that drama and theatre students were not people I wanted to spend time with. They were pretentious, as you would expect, and I was really enjoying the psychology papers. So I kept going, and I had a psychology degree, and I finished that. Still no idea that I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. I knew I wanted to be, at the time, I wanted to work with children, and I was all set to enroll in Teachers College, and then I got offered a place in a child psychotherapy course, and I thought, if I was teaching a class and the kid looks sad, I'd rather ask them what's wrong instead of saying, go back and focus on your maths. And so the child psychotherapy appealed. But during that course, I spoke to a clinical psychologist, Clive Banks, who said, go back and do your clinical psychology degree now, and you can change your careers. You can do lots of different things over your years of working without having to retrain. And that was such great advice. And I've done lots and lots of different things over the years. If I'd had a child psychotherapy degree, I would have been stuck in retraining a few years later. But now I've been able to work with children and teenagers and students and adults and at university settings and in private practice and in public health settings. And that's all been really exciting. Writing a psychology book was never part of the plan. And then I'm really pleased you mentioned Joe at the beginning, because Joe lives in London now, but we caught up together at the ACBS, Association of Contextual Behavioural Science conference in Sydney in dark ages, 2011 maybe, 13, something. And we're catching up, and he was telling me about a book he was writing. And I thought, that's amazing. If I wrote a book, I would write it like this. I'd say this, and I'd say this, and I'd say this. And I was like, I've got a book idea inside me. And I got on the plane home that day, and I wrote the first 20 pages of Stuff That Sucks, accepting what you can't change and committing to what you can. And pretty much the final printed edition of the book, those first 20 pages are exactly as I wrote it on the plane. So it just burst out of me. And that book led to so many amazing discussions around the world. Two I'd like to share, both from Seville, from the World Conference I went to in 2017. On the first day, I just sat next to this guy and I started talking to him, and he was over from Sierra Leone. And we got talking, and we sat next to each other every meal and every keynote speech after that. And I gave him a copy of my book. And later on, he emailed me saying that Stuff That Sucks was being used in a shelter for girls in Sierra Leone. And, often people say, how many copies of the book have you sold? And I say, one, and I gave it away. It doesn't matter about the quantity of books you sold. When you hear a story like that, it's very, very gratifying. Also at that conference, I got to meet Lisa Coyne from Boston, and I went to her workshop that day, and it was mind-blowing. So I was all kind of bravely trying to go up to talk to her at the conference drinks that evening. And two things happened. Firstly, I asked her, I said, I've written an ACT book. Have you ever seen it? And she goes, oh, you wrote Stuff That Sucks? We use that in our clinic in Boston. With every person who comes in, we give them a copy of that book. And that firstly just blew my mind to find out that, making a difference in Sierra Leone and in Boston. And secondly, someone else joined our conversation. And even though she was at the conference of clinicians, she started talking about OCD, and it was clear she was talking about her own OCD experience. And Lisa, in this conversation, in the pub, after teaching all day, was more present and connected and validating with this woman than I think I've ever seen any human being be ever. And I was just going, oh my gosh, what am I watching? I'm getting this absolute masterclass while I'm at a pub on the other side of the world in the evening. And that was about the only interaction I had with Lisa, that conference. And a few weeks later, she wrote to me and said, the people at the OCD clinic want to know if you'd do an OCD book as well. And I said, would you co-write it with me? And she said, sure. And suddenly it's like, oh my gosh, I've agreed to write a book with someone I've met once for half an hour in a pub. And luckily, Lisa was amazing, and we got to write the book Stuff That's Loud, A Teen's Guide to Unspiralling When OCD Gets Noisy. And that's led to so many other amazing discussions with people all over the world, and connections are formed. And I got lots and lots of good feedback from both those teen books. And one of the things that happened was a lot of people said to me, but when are you writing the adult version of the book? And so I wrote Holding the Heavy Stuff, Making Space for Critical Thoughts and Painful Emotions. And whereas the first book just kind of poured out of me, this was me trying to plagiarize myself and not use my first way of explaining about it, because I'd already written that in another book. So there were times it felt really hard to find different words, but also it was 10 years later, and the way I talk about these things has changed a lot too. But Holding the Heavy Stuff, my new book, is me trying to write stuff that sucks for adults. And it's been lovely getting the good feedback about it. That's ended up to being a very long introduction to who I am, and it's mostly more about the writing than the clinical practice. I also have a clinical practice in Wellington, New Zealand, where I work currently. About half my clients are adults or teenagers with OCD, and half my caseload are adults with sexual trauma, which gets ACC funding in New Zealand, so we got funding to do the longer therapy. I also run an ACT training business with my colleague Giselle Barr, and we run ACT workshops around Wellington, around New Zealand. And I do have a life outside psychology too. I got a wife and 3 kids and a cat and 3 guitars. And so that's all you need in life.
Beautiful. Ben was captivated by that. Thank you. Thank you. I want to just ask a few questions that occurred to me as you were speaking. Can I just get my head around the sequence of the books so that and who they were aimed at? Can you help me out with that and the listeners, please?
Sure. My first book, Stuff That Sucks, is aimed at teenagers who may not be getting therapy, may not have a formal diagnosis, may not need a formal diagnosis, but are struggling with mean thoughts, with sadness, with worries, with anger, with shame, all those emotions that all teenagers struggle with and don't get a lot of support for. And at the time that I wrote it, back in, I guess, 2013, I wrote the book. It was published in 2015. There were no good ACT books for teenagers. Apologies for anyone who had written a book before that. And more importantly, there was no good-looking books for teenagers. The design was rubbish in many, many ACT books. And I paid out of my own money for the designer and the illustrator so that I could maintain control of it and make sure it looked good. And it looks beautiful. And I remember another ACT author, whose name I won't mention, said to me later, I thought you were nuts spending all your own money on design. And then that person went on to use my designer at a later date. They just realized that actually we're just psychologists, and particularly those of us who write books or get messages across, we keep failing on the design aspect. If the message doesn't look good, if it's not something you want to pick up and look at, then you're not going to listen to the message inside. And so that was the first book. Second book followed from that. Stuff That's Loud was for teenagers specifically with OCD. And I don't know what it's like where you are in Europe, but in New Zealand, it is very hard to find a psychologist who works with OCD, and then even harder to find one who's well trained in ERP, and exposure and response prevention. So getting a book out there, for some people it got to be a nice thing to use alongside your therapy, and lots of people got it because they couldn't find therapy. And it's been very lovely hearing stories of people from New Zealand and from around the world who say, just reading your book helped me take some of the first steps I need to expose myself to the things that I was worried about and not to do the compulsions, and instead turn my energy towards my values. And then, as you said, the new book, which we'll talk about later on this podcast, I think, but Holding the Heavy Stuff, I can talk about lots. This book is aimed at adults who have human emotions and critical thoughts, so humans.
Wonderful. And the reason I wanted you to outline them for me and the listener is because my work is with adults in the workplace, either in groups or as individuals in coaching. And so many times adults will ask me, is this stuff available for my children? And I always love a resource to share with them that's based around the same approach that I use. So listeners, if you do want to introduce a book to your own children or grandchildren or friends, then check these books out. To be transparent, I've only read the latest one.
I'm going to suggest something for all your listeners out there. If you've got a teenager who's struggling, one of the really hard things about writing ACT for teenagers is adults know some of the answers, but we don't want to give it to the teens because they don't want to hear it from us, right? Their job is to figure it out and make their own mistakes. So please have a look at Stuff That Sucks, or Stuff That's Loud if you know someone struggling with OCD specifically, and then get a copy and leave it on the coffee table. Do not give it to your teen. Just leave it on the coffee table and see if they pick it up.
Great, great advice. Thank you. I'm going to go on one of my tangents now then.
Great.
I think I've got two tangents. I particularly loved the title. How did you come up with the titles? Because I think they really do what they need to do, and they really hit me in a way that helps me understand what the book's about and feel very relatable. How did you come up with the titles? Was that a light bulb moment, or was that something different?
Stuff That Sucks was a light bulb moment. I just knew. I said, I'm going to write a book called Stuff That Sucks. And again, it's about, we just pathologize human emotions so often. You know, I see lots of teenagers, they're not sad, they've got capital D depression, and they're not worried, they've got capital A anxiety. And helping break away from this, we're not trying to fix your pathology, we're trying to help you know what to do with all the different human emotions that we all experience and all those different thoughts that we all experience. So that's what I was trying to capture with Stuff That Sucks. It's about your internal experience, not about all the myriad of stuff in the world that's sucking right now. But all that stuff creates emotions that we need to learn to hold and make space for, and then choose what to do. The new book, Holding the Heavy Stuff, it's that balance. How do you hit the spot for adults in a way that doesn't feel patronizing, but also recognizes this is just the normal stuff? These emotions, we can choose to take them too seriously, see them as threatening, or we can figure out how to hold them. And that's what I'm trying to capture in that title.
Thank you. Well, they impact certainly with me, and I think it's a very powerful way to catch people's eye, if you like. And my other tangent was, in your clinical work, you specialize in OCD in part of your work. And I think thinking about OCD in the workplace, it's something that people will often refer to quite flippantly or in passing, reference perhaps to their own behavior or someone else's behavior. And I think it's misunderstanding the whole challenge, and I'm not sure, I can't think of the right word, but it feels like it could be offensive when someone's organized their desk and they go, oh, look at me, and just a little bit OCD. It feels like trivializing might be the word I'd use. I wonder if you could talk to me about that.
I think it's more than just trivializing. It's dangerous. It's something we need to speak out for as clinicians, speak out against. If I'm really suffering with OCD and I'm worried that I'm a pedophile, or I'm worried that I'm a terrible person that's going to hell, or that the universe doesn't make any sense, or any of the range of OCD themes, and I don't even know it's OCD because I turn on TV and they're talking about OCD as someone who just washes their hands a bit too often or likes things lined up neatly. And I have a colleague at work who lines things up neatly and says, oh, I'm a bit OCD about this. Then I don't even know the name for what I'm struggling with. And so anyone who just makes jokes about I'm a bit OCD, or uses it for someone who just gets pleasure out of lining things up or having a neat desk, undermines and can really do damage to people who are genuinely suffering, as some people with OCD, all people with OCD really are.
I guess it can really negate the impact of what someone's feeling inside. There's this triviality of reference to OCD, and perhaps cloud the paths that might provide them with support as well, or it just strikes me that it's damaging, and I think it's done through lack of awareness and knowledge.
Oh, it's meant harmless. I don't think anyone chooses to do harm. I think there's all sorts of things that we'd used to make jokes about that we've now learned actually that's offensive, or that makes it harder for someone to speak out against, and we wouldn't make jokes about those. And we're not there yet with OCD, but we should be. I'm not a big diagnosis guy. I try and avoid diagnoses as much as possible. Yet I'm very quick to give someone an OCD diagnosis because they've been sitting with the suffering going, there's something seriously wrong with me. I'm a danger to other people, or I'm a bad person. And going, no, you're not. You're just holding on too tightly to some thoughts. And then you have those thoughts and you do things to neutralize the power of the thoughts rather than going, oh, that's a weird thought, which is what the person with OCD does about every other doubt in their life, except for the one that's got sticky for them, and something that we all do. You know, we all have a thought like, gosh, I was walking along by the waterfront. I hope I don't just throw my phone into the water. And I go, but I'm not going to do that, and keep walking. And we have much scarier thoughts, much, sexual thoughts we want anyone else to know about, or violent thoughts we wouldn't want others to know about. But normally we can say, that was a thought. But when you fall down the OCD spiral, and any of us could fall into an OCD spiral, it's not a disease, it's just a cycle that some of us get stuck in some of the time. And when a certain thought shows up and you're like, it's not okay to have that thought, I need to do something to neutralize the power of that thought, to make sure it doesn't happen, to make sure it doesn't even come into my head. And by doing that, you do the compulsions. And the more you do the compulsions, the more you've marked those thoughts as dangerous, the more you're going to have them. And before you know, it's taking all your time and all your energy, trying not to have those thoughts. And the more you, as we always say in all parts of ACT, the more you don't want it, the more you have it.
Thank you. That's really helpful to begin to understand more about what it is and become more aware of how damaging that sort of flippant talk in life, in the workplace, can be.
Can I add one more thing about flippant talk? Just going to say, I've heard people tell me about their workplace. I had someone who recently was saying that her workplace had a workshop about neurodiversity, which is great. And they're trying to get everyone on the team to be more tolerant of different ways of us approaching life and thinking. And she said they listed OCD in there. And to me, OCD is not a neurodiversity. It depends on what different. Neurodiversity is not a medical term, it's an advocacy term. But OCD is a hole that any of us can fall down, and it's very treatable. And please, if you have OCD, you don't need to live with it. It's not a chronic life condition. It's something that can be treated. Please find help. Please find help from someone who's trained in exposure and response prevention. You don't need to live with OCD.
I'm going to change tack again, Ben, because you use ACT, and obviously it's deeply embedded in your books and your work. But when did you discover ACT?
It's a great question. Years before I even started as a clinical psychologist, I read Viktor Frankl, Man's Search for Meaning, and I found it so inspiring. But then I forgot all that. I went to clinical psychology school where we learned very mind over mood, Christine Badesky's style of cognitive behavioral therapy, helping everybody correct their thoughts. You know, the problem is you're thinking wrong. And that's how I learned to do psychology. And then I got my first job in the public health service at the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service. And I thought my job was to get people out of the negatives back to zero. How do I stop people being sad or being worried or having those thoughts? Great, you haven't got those thoughts, we can discharge you. And somehow in that first year, and I can't remember exactly who the first person who mentioned ACT was, but I remember one of the first times I was working with a teenager and we started talking about the meaning of life. And I was like, I can do this for a job? We can talk about what matters to you? No one told me that at psychology school. This is really exciting. And then I met someone else who had I can't remember their exact examples. I'm going to give a similar example. Someone who was phobic and had to fly to the other side of the world for a family wedding. So I'm like, great, I know how to do graded exposure. We'll start with getting on a bus and taking a bus around the corner, then going to the airport and sitting at the airport. And then she didn't do any of those graded exposure stages. And then when it came time to get to the family wedding, let's jumped on the plane and went there. And I realized that something I never learned in psychology training was sometimes the graded exposure is just because your psychologist is asking you to do it. There was no value in taking a bus around the corner. Whereas being on that plane to get to that family wedding, that wasn't negotiable. I'm going to white knuckle my way through the flight. I'm going to hate every minute of it. Maybe take benzos. These aren't ideal ways to get over a phobia of flying. But when there's a value, you're going to find a way to get there. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I need to find out more about this value stuff. And so I read back then, I think, many of us probably started with I Fit and Forsyth's Act for Anxiety book as one of the first ACT books out there. And then I got to go to a Robin Walser workshop when she came to New Zealand, and I was that annoying person just asking way too many brain questions about it, trying to get my brain around it, because I'd read all these books and I was trying it. And Robin Walser is the most experiential trainer in the world, and she didn't want my brain questions. She wanted me to just let my brain sit on the side and let my body and my heart experience ACT. So that was an interesting process for me. And since then, over the years, I've got the chance to attend workshops with many of the best ACT trainers in the world and learn more about it and think more about it and find my own words for it. And I think most importantly, if I'm having a bad day, I don't do cognitive restructuring. I don't sit there and go, well, what's the likelihood this bad thing's actually going to happen? I sit and reconnect with what matters to me and say, yep, this is where I want to go in life, and the worry or the sadness or the stress or the anger, they're going to come along for the ride. And so when I talk about ACT, I haven't been through some of the horrors that some of the people I work with have been through, but I can still know I'm speaking from an authentic place of this is what works for me when I struggle. And my struggles are different from your struggles, but these are the strategies that work for me. And I invite you to try them, and if they work for you, then use them as well.
Lovely. And that self-disclosure I find is very powerful in my work. If I'm working with a group of, just think out one of my latest group of adults I worked with, and they were engineers in a high-performance environment. So I went in there with perhaps a greater degree of trepidation or anxiety than I might do with a regular workplace group, because it had these layers of high-performance environment and engineers, and my stereotypical mind was saying they're going to be mostly men, and that was true. And they're going to be kind of very sort of, let's fix this, technical and sort of rigid in their approach. And I couldn't have been more wrong. The first session, I tend to focus on using the ACT matrix in my work, which we've adapted, me and Paul Flaxman have adapted for the workplace. And I got them to think about the ACT matrix in a relationship in their lives. And it felt like quite a big risk with this audience. And I used an example from my life. And then these, mainly guys, there were 3 women, but mainly guys were opening up and saying things like, ooh, I realize that when I get home in the evening, my mind is still at work and I'm not always listening to my partner. Or another guy saying, I'm missing out on my children growing up because I'm not there. I'm not being the dad I want to be. And inside I was like feeling quite joyful at this moment when people were sharing, because I was like, my God, this can really connect with people. This approach can really connect with people at a level that's quite immediate, and they can immediately, hopefully, some of them see the benefits there for them. And I think that disclosure part is really important, to say that I haven't nailed this. And I wonder if you experienced the same.
Oh, all the time. In my workshops, I'll always give examples of my worried thoughts, and it's weird. I get up and train people on how to do ACT, but I know if they saw some of the sessions I have, still, they'll go, what? I'm getting training from you? And I certainly disclose that. I just try and disclose it in my books too, saying not every therapist is right for every person, and, find someone who works for you. But, that feeling of, gosh, these people looking at me like I know what I'm doing. And sometimes that's true, luckily. I have learned some stuff along the way, and I still get it wrong for some people. And in my personal life, I definitely get it wrong in a lot of conversations, or miss the mark, or aren't present enough when I'm talking to someone. And sometimes overtly disclosing that can be helpful. But even if I don't disclose it, just me knowing that I'm sitting alongside another human being who has critical thoughts and painful emotions as well, that just changes the way I sit with them. rather than, well, I've figured out all the answers and you just need to do the Ben Sedley method and you'll
Mm.
feel better in 12 steps. I'm like, yeah,
Mm.
this stuff is hard for all of us, and it is. And no one promised us it would be easy, but we always live like it's easy for everyone else. And there's something wrong with me if I'm finding this life hard.
Yeah. Now, as you've been talking, Ben, and as I was reading your book and thinking about you, I was just playing a little, I wonder if, thinking about your own values, what drives you. I wonder, and I've jotted some down. I feel you're someone who wants to be of service, someone who will embrace an adventure. I'm thinking about your adventure and your curiosity when, for instance, Clive gave you that advice and you went down the clinical route. And I also see great creativity there. And do any of those resonate with you as I present them?
Yeah, I think I'm in New Zealand, and so obviously we've gone, this far into conversation without mentioning rugby, and that's going to be a problem. For a while, the All Blacks had a motto, "Don't be a dick," and I try and prefer to say it more positively of be kind, and be kind. You can't be everything for everybody, and you're not going to get it right for everybody, but you can always care about people and include yourself in the people that you care about. And I've been really fortunate in my life. I feel like I do give a lot to people I work with, but also friends and family and my community. But boy, I've seen it pay off tenfold, the kindness and love I've received from so many people in my life and how special that is.
Mm.
I don't take it for granted, and I do my best to give it back to everyone as much as I can as well. And that drives my life, and it drives my clinical work. And sometimes I'm not the best technical clinician. I'm not the best person at saying, right, we've got these 6 sessions, come back, focus on this topic. Because my value is being present and being kind. I do have the technical stuff, I hope. I know what I'm doing, but that's never the foremost of the work I'm doing.
Couple more questions for this part, Ben. Thinking about young Ben at school, before you finished school and went on that gap year, would you have any advice for your younger self at school?
Oh yeah, practice guitar more. I've been playing guitar badly for 40 years, and this year I've started having guitar lessons again. I had an Uber driver who just said, "Oh, I've just moved back to New Zealand, I'm setting up a guitar school." And I was like, great. So suddenly I'm getting guitar lessons from my Uber driver, and he's wonderful. And the whole time I'm thinking, like, if I had a teacher like you when I was in high school, and if I just practiced and practiced, then life would be better because I'd be better at guitar. But beyond that, when I think back to my high school years, I had some lovely friends. I did all right at school. And there's just those moments that haunt me where I missed a chance to be kind, or I said something that was meant as joke but missed the mark and hurt someone, or maybe it's deliberately hurtful, and I don't know how to word that advice. But that's the parts of my teenage life that I regret the most, of those times I said something wrong. And so if anyone's listening and they're at high school with me and I said something mean to you or unkind or missed the mark in the joke, then I'm really sorry. That's the advice I give. Listen more. Dig a bit deeper to be kind and compassionate.
And we come to the people soup question of the song that you would like to announce your arrival in a room, whether it's a real or virtual room, for the next few weeks, not forever. So do you have a song, Ben, and what is it and why?
Oh my God, that's a fun question. Because the reality is, I don't want to be announced when I walk in the room. I don't want to be, hey, everyone look at me when I walk in the room. But I'm going to play the game. And if I was going to have a song, if you're going to commit to having a song, then it's got to be a song that announces your arrival. It's got to be something like, I'm going to be annoying Ross and give you 3, because they all do the same thing of, the Superstars of Wrestling Ultimate Warrior theme song. That's how you enter the room when you're about to beat the Honky Tonk Man at SummerSlam. That just silences people right there. Or the Good, the Bad, the Ugly theme. That's how the Ramones walk. The Ramones walk on the stage to that. And that's just... You just the room goes silent and ready for you to walk in. Or you got to be careful what questions you ask me after this one, because the other one that does that would do that. And again, I don't want to make intention.
Ooh.
But those first two bars of the Sopranos theme song, and boom, you've got, that's how you walk into a room with that just woke up this morning starts. And there you go. But that's not how I want to walk into a room. But you ask me about songs, I could talk about music for quite some time.
If I was going to be a little bit cruel and force your hand and say for the next 2 weeks you had to choose one of those three, which would it be?
Good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's just what a great piece of music that is.
That's it, Pea Supers, part 1 of my chat with Dr. Ben in the bag. You'll find the show notes for this episode at peoplesoup.captivate.fm or wherever you get your podcasts. Next week, we have part 2 with Ben, where we chat more about his brilliant book, Holding the Heavy Stuff. Now more than ever, you can help me reach more people with the special People Soup ingredients, stuff that could be really useful for them. So please, if you found this episode useful, do share it with people you know. And also, if you subscribe and drop us a review, it helps us get recognised in the podcast charts. Thanks to Andy Glenn for his spoon magic and Alex Engelberg for his vocals. But most of all, dear listener, thanks to you. Look after yourselves, Pea Supers, and bye for now.
Road Fisher was the name of one of the songs that Joe wrote about a serial killer, I believe. And that became the name of the band as well. And you've never heard of us before, and that's not necessarily a bad thing.